All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Inside In Tennis Podcast. Mitch Michals here, all part of the Believe Network. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice. We're on the road to Roland Garros, almost there, and it's my honor to bring into the show a returning guest, someone who is a wealth of knowledge. He's covered the game and the sport of tennis for so long for the New York Times, the International Herald Tribune. He's got a Substack now, and he is an accomplished author. He wrote the book Over My Right Shoulder, The Master, the Roger Federer book. And coming out May 13th, right here, the warrior Rafael Nadal and his kingdom of clay. Chris Clarey, welcome back to the show. Chris, it's always a delight for me to talk tennis with you.
Mitch, we meet again. It's great. Yeah, it's exciting times here.
So first thing, and I wanted you to put this into maybe tennis terms. Where are we at right now in the process? Like 4 days before a book comes out, is this the jitters of pre-match? Is this the celebration? Where do we relate it to the athlete perspective?
Yeah, starting to get pretty real. When it really gets real is it's funny because we send out the advanced copies to people like you that get a chance to read it. And we're going to talk about it, but I don't get those advanced copies. So, I wrote the darn thing, and I've seen it different ways, different forms along the way as we edit it and get it ready. But when that box comes to your house as the author and you actually open it up and see, oh, wow, that's the thing. It's finished. Mm-hmm. That's something. That's something special. It's kind of like, I don't know whether, obviously, a painter or somebody like that, they see the painting, they're doing it. And when it's done, and they're right in front of them. But the book's an interesting thing. You don't see that final product until a little bit later in the game than you might suspect. And that's when that box comes. I remember when the Master came. It's a powerful thing. So I don't think it feels entirely real until then. When you hold it in your hand, and you start giving a couple of your friends as well. It's a nice thing.
It's interesting too for this one. Again, we've chatted before. It's always been a blast, but this specific book, the Nadal book, and we kind of informally mentioned it. You mentioned last year, like, okay, we're going to have a Nadal book coming. It was kept under wraps, which I hope I proved I'm a good source. I didn't leak anything. There was no leaking that this book was coming out. So the process, right? Like, if you could walk me through the idea, the Master comes out, it's a hit, and there's the update when it was written. Federer's career wasn't quite over. But this book in particular, Nadal's book, when did the idea come to write it? I know you have a lot of experience with him, covering him and interviewing him, but what was the process like from the genesis of starting the idea of this book?
To be honest with you, Mitch, my wife's French. I speak French. My kids are French American. I lived a few blocks from Roland Garros when I first got married. That's the tournament that I know of all the sports events that I've covered. It's probably the tournament that I know the best. Mm-hmm. And I've covered the most, well over 30 times. And so I feel like I really wanted to write a book about Roland Garros at some time in my life when I was young, before Nadal arrived. So that it kind of goes back to that. I knew I wanted to write about this place. Books about place, just themselves, it's not always the easiest thing. And I was writing daily journalism at that point, so it wasn't really going to be happening. But I think once I saw Nadal kind of take over possession of the place, in just an amazing, unthinkable way, really. Mm-hmm. Pretty early along in that process, I started to think, well, maybe there's a way to bring these two together in some fashion down the road. And
I thought that was, and I had that written down too, Chris, like the idea of the concept of this book, where it's a book about Nadal, his dominance in tennis, but specifically at this tournament, Roland Garros. But you use the history of Roland Garros and clay court tennis as like a tent pole. So that was the concept, right? The idea that this was a guiding light, this was the North Star, was it's about Nadal, but it's always going to gravitate toward the history of this prestigious event.
Yeah, I think I needed to find a lens that would work, and I did not want to do. It's like anything we're doing, right? You don't want to do the same podcast every time. You don't want to do the same project A to Z. You need a new format and a new approach to keep it fresh. These books are all consuming, take up so much of your time, especially in the actual writing process. It really becomes your life. Night and day. So you really got to feel good about the structure. And I think you have to feel like you're learning and progressing while doing it to make it work. So I think that was the key for me, is that the Master is a very different animal in terms of how it's structured and approached. It's obviously got Federer's rivals in it, but it's very place-based. It's all sort of Roger's world describing it to you. Mm-hmm. This one is sort of man in place. You got Rafa's career's in here. You got the Wimbledon finals, you got the Aussie Open finals, you got the U.S. Open finals, you got Monte Carlos and the Madrids and the Romes, but you really have his defining thing, which is, let's be honest, it's 14 French Opens and it's this place, and I wanted to really dive into that, and I think that was the key to having the freshness mentally to do it. And it was challenging for sure, because it is kind of going in and out of these two things, and you don't want them to feel like, oh, he slapped two books together. And I hope I achieved that. But that was the writing challenge of it. And honestly, that was kind of the fascination of it too, because he changed Roland Garros, and Roland Garros changed him. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's almost like the master in this book, Rafael Nadal and his Kingdom of Clay. They're kind of like cousins in a way. And I don't just say that because you wrote both of them about two all-time greats in the same era, but there is a lot of Nadal in the master. It's almost like it opens the door to what this book was. And that was part of what was fascinating too about this one, is you hear the perspectives of Nadal, Federer, but then Djokovic, how different personality-wise these players were. Their styles were different. They're legends of the sport, but you get to hear their perspectives, and you're writing in some interviews with them. So I think opening the door to what the differences are between these all-time legends personality-wise was a big part as well.
Yeah, and much like us, as you know, we watched all these rivalries as part of the fascination of the Big Three era, was to watch these guys bounce off each other on the court, and it was good that there were three, not just two. It made it more interesting. And I think whereas the Master really goes deep on Federer Nadal and Federer Djokovic, this one through Nadal's prism looks at really the greatest depth. Nadal Djokovic is the greatest depth of this one, because of those just epic battles that they had in very different way and different vibe than the Federer Nadal battles. So I think that's a good way to put it. They're cousins. Hopefully there's not a whole lot of overlap at the dinner table. I wanted to try to avoid that. You can't not talk about Federer and Nadal, and you can't do justice to Nadal's career. But I think ultimately you'll get the full experience if you read them both. I'm not pitching book number one here, but I think it would help. So I really consciously tried to avoid repeating myself and delving into the same things. There's a little bit of it, but not much. And that was part of the beauty of the format too, Mitch.
Yeah.
Having the Roland Garros Nadal thing allowed us to look at Nadal through a different lens in a different way.
I thought a lot of this book was fascinating, especially in my perspective, some stuff I learned and didn't really know about when you talk about clay court tennis and the history of the game and the history of Roland Garros. There were really fascinating points, right? Not just about the French Musketeers, the pioneers that really started tennis in France and took it forward, but you literally go back as far as the history of the game and certain areas that I don't think a lot of people have covered. Certainly my demographic might not know about. How crucial and important was it to go all the way back in this book and really start at the beginning?
Well, I wanted to talk about, tennis in France and how it became red clay as sort of their surface, which is standard in the major. But if you live in France, most of their courts aren't clay.
Hmm.
Most of their courts are some form of a hard court, or they have this sort of resin coated thing called quick, which is for me as a California hard courter, a little tricky to play on because it feels a little bit slippery, and it's not clay. It's a hard court. But most of their courts, clay courts, have become harder and harder to find in France. So Roland Garros is an outlier within France, but I really wanted to dig into this unique surface and go back to the origins of it. And honestly, I was truly curious because I'd heard this story about the Renshaws in southern France, and grass court got baked out, couldn't play, so they found a way to like take some clay pots and break them up and spread them over the court, and it allowed for a surface you could play on despite the grass being ruined. It's a great story, but it's just not true. Real historians have looked into this, including Alan Little, who was the Wimbledon librarian for a long time and an excellent tennis historian, now passed. And he wrote a great book about tennis on the French Riviera, when he explores and explains why this is completely impossible, because the Renshaws weren't even here when this could have happened, and they arrived later on. They certainly played a lot there, but so that's a clay court myth. But nobody really knows when the first red clay court was put in place, and it's pretty logical to assume it was down in the southern France because of the climate and everything else. But what I didn't even think about, and what I didn't know, was when tennis was lawn tennis was created. Tennis is obviously ancient and goes back a long way, but when lawn tennis was created by Wingfield having the kits for lawn tennis in the late 19th century, English became passionate about it. Two things. One, why did it spread so fast? Well, because they already had croquet lawns. It's the All England Lawn Tennis and Croquet Club. Don't forget. They already had these beautifully manicured croquet lawns that they had already ready, and they could be used as lawn tennis courts. And croquet was kind of falling out of favor, was considered a bit too tame. But the great appeal of croquet was it allowed men and women to very kind of in an honorable fashion
Level, yeah,
compete together, spend time together, flirt together, all those kind of things.
of course.
So lawn tennis was a lot more vigorous and active, and so it kind of filled the role. And they already had of course, that explains how lawn tennis sort of caught fire. And the other thing was when it came to France, a lot of English colonies were in Normandy and Brittany. They brought it over, and they didn't have any tennis courts yet. What did they play on? They played on the beaches.
Ooh.
They played on the beaches, and I found some old books and old histories of tennis that show hundreds of sort of tennis courts laid out on these wide, vast beaches of Normandy and Brittany. When you have low tide, it obviously creates a long, hard, packed, flat thing.
Yeah.
And you have women in skirts and men in suits out there with their rackets playing on the sand of France. So
Another surface. Yeah.
That is ultimately the precursor to clay, is the packed sand. And there are some clay courts around the world that are still kind of a sand base, including one in my old city of Sevilla in Spain where I lived, where they use a sand base. So the whole history of clay from the Australians, Rod Laver and Roy Emerson and all those guys growing up on a surface called ant bed, which is crushed termite hills in Australia, to Vijay Armitage and the Indian players growing up on cow dung courts, packed dung, natural surface courts, that whole history. I hope people don't get tired of reading that chapter, but to me, I found that endlessly interesting just to go back and look at all these sort of ways people have made the most of their situations. So clay court tennis it's a longer story than I knew, definitely a more varied and rich story than I knew, but there's still nobody who's ever been able to tell me, maybe no one's ever told me where the first red clay court was. And the other thing that's interesting is that the very early years of the French championships, which go back to 1893, I believe. I want to say, in that range there. No, 1891, sorry. It wasn't on clay.
Yeah.
The first French championships was on grass. They don't know that 100% for sure, but there's no real pictures or anything that show the surface, but there's reports of them slipping on a rainy day. And that couldn't be clay. So it had to be grass. But it turned into clay relatively early. So the whole story is rich, and I wanted to go back and really get into the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah.
Pardon the pun.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is that no one's going to be able to, from 1891 or 1893, correct you if you're off by a little bit on the year. So we got that good. But yeah, I mean, we even go back to the history of the name tennis. I saw a Napoleon reference in there. I mean, we're crossing streams of tennis, but it was fascinating to hear and learn about the game, and obviously Rafa, and someone you covered from Wimbledon 2003. He arrives in his first main draw in this legendary career, to say the least. But in writing the book and looking back, maybe reviewing some notes and maybe learning a little bit more about Rafa that you didn't know, was there anything that stood out in terms of things you learned, maybe even shocked you a little bit as you're going through this process of writing this book?
There's one moment. In an early interview, he had just won Monte Carlo in 2005, which was his first time in Monte Carlo. I mean, he won Monte Carlo, his first title there. And he would go on to dominate that year, and that was the first year of the French Open. And we're talking in the clubhouse above the court, and it's a good interview, doing it in my mediocre Spanish and doing my best. And he basically says, I got this bad habit, and I got to get rid of it, and I know I got to get rid of it. I'm going to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the kicking from the back.
He did not get rid of it.
It was 20 years ago. So it was already bugging him that he was doing it, and he wanted to break the habit, and of course we know he never did, and he only added some more habits. So I thought that was a very human moment to go back and see that and realize that it's a heck of a lot harder than any of us realized.
That part was a good section. We talked before, I haven't gotten all the way through it, but I did get through that part, and it is like you're lost in the moment. I've watched most of Nadal's career, I'd say. Got on pretty early when he started winning. But even so, we're in the moment, right, Chris? We're watching this legend play. We've seen a lot of his matches. I didn't realize until that section. Then I went back and watched some highlights. Yeah, he did add rituals. But in the moment, you're not thinking like, oh, he's adding rituals. You're just lost in it. He does a few. But it was kind of jarring to read that section, go back and be like, yeah, he does like 10 different things that he didn't do in 05, 06.
Yeah. I remember, Jim Courier and I sat down for a New York Times story. I think when Rafa was going for the decima, the 10th one, and tried to look back at 2005 and that first year. And it is amazing. It's a lot less layered. I mean, he definitely had the short thing that he had, and he had maybe touched a little bit the face, but the elaborate rituals, and in a sense, I'm not saying it's sad, but it is poignant in a way because it shows that even a guy like Nadal, this supreme competitor, who was such a mentally strong athlete and such an outlier in that regard, and so exemplary in so much of his behavior. I mean, Courier was watching it and he was saying, just you can just I think it's just a reaction to the stress and the pressure
Yeah.
of trying to hold this role and compete at this level for so long. What else could be the explanation? I mean,
Right.
tennis players need to find a way to cope. And there may be a lot of internal things that are going on with players that we'll never know or never
Mhm.
see, obviously, but Nadal exteriorized a lot of it. But it also is a testimony to just how hard elite level tennis is. And actually, if you go to any club on a Sunday and look at the rituals before serves and how
Yeah.
hard it is to change your service motion or whatever it is, these things are anchored in tennis in a way that I think
Yeah.
it's pretty eloquent.
The two things about Nadal that stood out to me and you highlight, eloquently in this book, like if you break down, forget about the accolades and everything, the willingness to suffer, right? Like he's willing to put the work in, he embraces it, he even says so much in interviews with you, the willingness to compete and push yourself to the depths and keep going. But the other thing too is the process. Like he is so process oriented because tennis is, winning a Grand Slam, winning a major in France or otherwise, you have to win 7 straight matches. So it's not like you're just back in the final every year. You have to go through this 2 week
Mm,
trek. And I
yeah,
think those are the two things that set him apart from everybody else is that he embraces the suffer and he also embraces the process that you're going to have to go through this journey that you can't just win all in one moment.
right. I call it sort of it's willful amnesia in a way because he's essentially every year. It's not like he expressed this only one time that I recall, but he did express it. He says, "I'm not interested in winning Roland Garros 9 times, 10 times, 11 times. I want to win Roland Garros," and that's very simple in a way. But Rafa's great at that. He's great at sort of boiling things down. And why wasn't that obvious before you said it? It should have been obvious, but you make it obvious. But I think he really lived that, and I think that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. I think to block out winning it 9, 10 times before and winning an 11th time, but he wasn't winning at the 11th time. He was winning it
Uh-huh.
that year, that moment, that time. And I think that's a really good lesson for all of us. Maybe have our repetitive moments in our careers or whatever it might be. You need to isolate it, work on the challenge at hand, use the tools you have at your disposal in this moment. Forget about what happened in 2005 when you could run faster or you could leap higher or whatever it was.
Yeah.
What matters is now. Maybe my foot is numb. I can't feel it. It's 2022. Forget about the rest. I'm here. I'm in this thing. And that is one of Nadal's genius aspects, I think, for sure. And you're absolutely right. It's the process that was a key to something as outlandish as winning 14 French Opens or 12 Barcelonas or 11 Monte Carlos or 10 Italian Opens.
So many accolades. It's pretty insane to think about. We've got more with Chris Clarey here on the Inside in Tennis podcast, author of The Warrior, Rafael Nadal and His Kingdom of Clay, out May 13th. So as you're listening to this, it will be releasing in a day or so. So we'll be on the lookout for that in the United States, releasing all around the world. Chris, one of the parts of this book, and I was curious because it was an underlying thing, but covering the relationship between Rafael Nadal and, in a lot of ways, Spaniards and the country of France and French tennis. It wasn't always sunshine and rainbows, and there was a lot of underlying storylines and subplots. There were some unsubstantiated, allegations. There was the fact that Nadal did not master the language of French. So there was a lot to get into in terms of that relationship, which obviously, is a good one at this point, given what he's done. But how is it covering that side of things? Maybe not the glamorous side of Nadal in this journey with France.
Yeah, it was interesting because I lived in Spain um, for 8 years in Sevilla before Rafa, just before he really emerged. I left there at kind of end of 2004, and I came back to Seville having just left when he won the
Mhm.
Davis Cup with Spain and had his first big breakthrough. And my wife's French, like I said, and I spent a lot of time around Roland Garros and in France. So these are the two cultures in Europe that I know the best. So for me to sort of see the way they kind of collided and ultimately came together was fascinating, and another one of the reasons why I really wanted to do the book this way and really dive into this subject because I felt like I had a good seat for all this culturally as well. But the French one is fascinating. I think it was a bit of a roller coaster. It wasn't like they resisted him at the start. I think they really embraced him when he was this prodigy with all this evident charisma and energy, and teenager winning the French Open on his first appearance. I mean, because he'd been injured before, missed the first two when he could have played. He didn't play there as a junior, so he arrives on site to play and he wins the darn thing. And he arrived as the favorite, which is just a difficult thing to imagine. Your first time, and there's no training wheels. You're just doing it, and he managed it. Didn't even play a five setter. So he comes in and wins it in '05. My recollection from living it and speaking the language at that point was the French just loved that. That was just great. It was new and it was visually great, and the whole thing, even though his style wasn't Federer-esque. Federer hadn't really become Federer at that point yet, even though he was number one in the world at that point. They hadn't quite established his full impact in France. So that part was powerful and a good connection. Then as soon as it became monotonous and it started to become a kind of a foregone conclusion that Rafa would win the French Open, you could feel the resistance there for that. And then, of course, the '08 final against Federer when he absolutely destroys him, and Roger only wins 4 games. And it was huge anticipation for that match. And it was just like, it wasn't like Rafa's genius. It was, deflation.
No, it was, yeah.
Yeah, he's sort of, he's broken the toy.
That's a good point, though, because fatigue in sports is an underlying cause of anything. Like when you wrote about the Soderling upset, I think that speaks a lot to sports fans in general, any sport, any country, that you want to see you want to see the upset. You want to see the new person win, regardless of who it is. So you have a 10-time, at the time it was 4, but you have a champion that's just been dominating. You're intrigued by the upset. You might be pulling for the underdog or somebody else. And I think that's part of it too. I mean, I know there's layers to this thing, but I thought in the Soderling section, people just wanted to change for the sake of change.
Yeah, they did. But also think about it. 05, 06, 07, 08, first 4, not one 5-setter. None.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
It's insane.
And Rafa's not a fully formed champion yet. He's still developing. Yeah. So it just tells you the margin, the delta that was in play here. And for sure, the French, give us something. Give us some suspense, Actually, the first final in 05 is against Mariano Porta is a really compelling match. It's got a lot to it. And it was a 4-setter, but it could easily have gone 5, and it was tight and very watchable to watch it again. But a lot of these matches really, as much as I admire Rafa's craft and watching greatness at work, I mean, it's not what the French were looking for in their signature sporting event and all that. So you're right. 09 was that. And then I think already by 09 in this period, there is the issue of, and it's not Rafa's fault, it's the climate of global sport with concerns about doping and suspicions about anything extraordinary, with Lance Armstrong having won so many Tours de France and then being all a sham and a scam, and all the cycling scandals and track and field scandals in this period, Olympic stuff. It's European culture and sport is very much steeped in all this. And Rafa, who looks like a dominant, aggressive, well-muscled athlete and is destroying everybody on clay, I think people not only got tired of it, but also got suspicious about it. So, and there was some stuff that was printed in the French press in particular that was sort of associating Nadal. None of it was ever substantiated. I talked about it, and there's a moment in the book. I'm not going to talk about everything in the book, obviously, but there's a point in there where I talked to him early in his career about the allegations, and he has some really poignant things to say about it, and did not shy away from the topic at all. Ultimately, there's not a shred of proof anywhere about anything all the way through, but that did play a big factor in I think Rafa's relationship with the French, the dominance combined with sort of the culture of doping and the concerns about that in the wider sporting world.
Yeah.
And so I think that period of like 2011, 2012, because he won 4, lost to Soldering, and then he won 5.
Mm-hmm.
And there were at least a couple 5-setters in that period. But Isner in the first one was 2010, right, in the first round.
Yeah.
Such a crazy, experiment of a contrast of players. But so, again, there was the fatigue factor, and then there was this factor. And then you have Rafa's great crisis, which people probably have forgotten by now, but 15-16 was crisis of confidence. Very difficult moment, very vulnerable.
Tough.
Gets destroyed by Novak in 15 in the quarterfinals, straight sets, is a shadow of himself, honestly, at that point, and kind of has stage fright, has to work through it. There's a lot more to that story, I think, than even I was able to find out. But for sure, a moment that very difficult and could easily have been the end. And then he comes back. in 17, the year that Federer comes back as well. And then Rafa, rips off 4 more.
Yeah.
This time, because of the vulnerability, because of just the astonishment of what this guy's able to do in our big show place, I think there is a gradual embracing of him. And
Yeah.
ultimately, the Olympics is the peak where you can sort of feel the Paris Olympics in 24 when he grabs the flame from Zidane on a unfortunately very rainy night.
Yes, it was.
But he was still beaming, and that shows you how far the
Yeah.
relationship has come. And I think it's very genuine. I think
Yeah.
he's even the variety loving French and underdog loving French ultimately had to just accept that Nadal was Nadal, and that's what he was going to do. And we're going to embrace it in a way which would have seemed unthinkable back in that Soderling match.
We love a comeback. Everybody likes the redemption or, comeback arc, so to speak. And yeah, it was just funny thinking about Australia 2017 when that final was Federer and Nadal. And a lot of people thought this is it, right? The last chance for both. They made it to this draw and then they go on and have more success. Well, on that note, did you have a version of Nadal? Maybe a time frame or a specific run where you thought was his quote unquote peak? Hard to say for a guy who's won it 14 times, but was there one run or one version of Nadal that you think maybe stands out above the others?
That's a great one. I mean,
because I was going to say 17 actually. That 17 range when he comes back, like I have to look back. I think was that the year he beat Stan in the final. Like I just think that there was no real test for him. Like he is so much further ahead of the field, and it was the perfect combination, Chris, of he's smarter, he's wiser, but hasn't physically slipped. Like when an athlete's, the intersection of you're getting smarter, but maybe your physical strengths and your peak go down. I think that was the perfect intersection, like 31-year-old Rafa.
Yeah, it is kind of like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Equation, and then that's sort of the point. And I think if you watch Rafa play in 2015, I don't think you could have thought that was possible.
Right.
I guess the only reason why I maybe wouldn't, maybe 17 maybe on clay. I see your point.
Yeah.
Overall, I mean, I watched those matches. Was it in Indian Wells and maybe Miami too, when Roger beat Rafa?
17. Yeah.
And it was,
Yeah.
Rafa wasn't playing badly. Roger was just out of this world. I mean, Brad Gilbert thinks that might have been peak Roger in 17. It was quite a statement. That's kind of where maybe Roger kind of managed to get to here again. So I don't know about that overall season, but I mean,
Clay.
honestly, 2010 was an awfully impressive season as well, and he got the first U.S. Open. 2013, 2008 when he wins French Open, giving 4 games to Federer in the final, and then beats him at Wimbledon. I mean, those are massive. Whatever happened the rest of the year, that's just a massive achievement. But the level he was able with his drive and his work ethic to add things to his game all along. I remember in 2010 talking to John McEnroe outside like the Nike store the day after Rafa beat Djokovic in the final to win the first U.S. Open in 2010. And John McEnroe saying, I've never seen anybody who was so good already improve that much. He was seeing the serve at that point had gotten really big. He had backhand slice had been added and improved. The net game had gotten better despite the unconventional grips. So McEnroe was just seeing this guy who already was great in 08, obviously, progressing in 2010 into him an extraordinary way. So, and that was 14 years before he finished.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's these guys.
A tough one.
I mean, I wish there was a way there probably would be now as they play Alcaraz and Sinner. We may be able to actually identify peak Alcaraz or peak Sinner 20 years from now in a way we can't with these guys, but we can speculate.
When you first saw him at Wimbledon 03, what was the initial thought process of your first reaction to seeing him? Did you think greatness was possible on any level? I know it's impossible to predict what he did, but that first, impression of Nadal as a teenager at the All England Club?
Well, I was living in Spain then, so I had heard about him for sure. And I was still kind of reeling with embarrassment because the first time I wrote about him was 2002, when he won his first match on tour, Mallorca. I think he was 15. And Gasquet had done something great around the same time. They were linked still at that point. And I wrote about how exciting it was that there was this Frenchman named Gasquet and this Spaniard named Rafael Nadal Pereira, because he was identified by the double name at that point with his mother's name, Pereira. And they both had one-handed backhands.
Yeah.
I had never seen him. There was no YouTube. There was no social media.
Different time, yeah.
The ATP had no videos. There was none of that stuff. So I was just word of mouth, and I had somehow gotten the word that he had a one-handed backhand. So I wrote this, and so it's there in the archives. If you ever want to check it out, it's
Yeah.
you embarrass me further. So that's how it started for me. So it could only go up from there. But when I saw him at Wimbledon, obviously I'd heard about him, and he had won. He and Albert Costa, reigning French Open champion at Monte
Yeah.
Carlo, which caught everybody's attention in '03. So went out to the court to watch him. That's the day I met Toni as well, and he was on an outside court at Wimbledon. He played there in the boys singles the year before, and he was just. I saw him first from a distance playing on one of those courts just behind center court in the Ivy, and I remember thinking, that can't be him. That looks like a 25-year-old.
Yeah.
He's this physical, he's strong presence. And then when they saw him afterward around the changeovers, he got close to kind of chubby face, with a little bit of acne, and kind of
Right.
didn't look fully formed, really,
Yeah.
And but you could see just this positive, competitive energy, and that's what really stuck with me, was just how sort of relentlessly he competed, but how there was positive energy in it. It was not. It was not. I'm going to come after you and destroy you. It was more like, just want to express what I have inside of me, this competitive instinct. And honestly, I don't think I fully processed it at the time, but it is maybe the signature trait about Nadal, isn't it? That he's internally lit, but he has this positivity to his tennis, even though he's not like a lighthearted Alcaraz smiling between crazy points. Very rare to see any kind of smile or engagement from Rafa during a match. But that's what struck me. It was a physical impression. And then we talked to him afterward, and my Spanish was a bit better in those days. And so we had interviewed with him, a small group of us, and he was, a teenager, kind of clipped answers, but he was lively, and he's very, very clear on one thing, was that he was not in any way just putting in routine hours on the grass. He had ambition on the grass.
Yeah.
Talked about Feliciano Lopez having done well already at that point on the grass. So that was sort of surprising, is that this guy who was already known for clay court was clearly very tuned in to grass courts and Wimbledon and multi-surface, even then, 5 years before he would win it.
It was very, very fascinating to read about the early Nadal before he became this legend. And and as you highlighted too, Chris, the Uncle Tony side of things, right? Their relationship, how his uncle was his coach, a guy who didn't have that top flight pro experience as a player. The uniqueness of it, I think that's another side, is that you're going to see all these young players. You've seen them like try to, how can I create the next Nadal in myself, in my child? There's nothing quite like it, right? The relationship between Nadal and Toni, Tony's methods, how he coached Rafa, certain things he did that you highlight in the book, but also Nadal's ability to respond and to embrace the methods that his uncle had. I don't know that we'll ever see a relationship quite like this in coach player ever again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think about it. I mean, you think about the players we have now that are emerging. There's nobody that would be equivalent to that. I would not say never, because obviously you do see, I think what made it interesting was he was the uncle.
Yeah.
It wasn't the father. It wasn't a friend. It was the uncle. And I think that is also why it worked. There was that family loyalty and respect. Maybe it made Rafa absorb and take more than he might take from an outsider, but it wasn't his dad.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to be in full rebellion and rejection mode. And so it was kind of once removed from that core, even though they all lived in the same big house.
Each time he won, like, it's also the part of, he becomes this accomplished champion. The majors and French Open titles start racking up, but there's still deference to what his uncle's saying. There's still obedience. And I think that part might be rare for anyone that becomes an established champion, the uncle side of it notwithstanding, of course.
Yeah, I think it goes deep to the roots of the Nadal family and to life on Mallorca and sort of the hierarchical nature of that and the tightness of the Nadal clan. And also, let's give Toni credit. Toni is an amazing performance psychologist in many ways. And I think his real gift is young players, as Rafa himself has said. And I think Toni might even admit, I think Toni is exceptional with youngsters because he has this code of conduct. He has a lot of presence and charisma. He's got that voice, that kind of husky tenor voice that when you talk to people who know Toni, they all imitate. They can all do a good Toni. I'm sure Rafa can, even though I have never heard him do it. And so I just think that whole combination it was part of the alchemy of Rafa. But let's be honest, there's no way Nadal would be a tennis player if not for Toni. Not just a champion. He would not be a tennis player
Yeah,
because
it'd be
Rafa
soccer.
is all the centrifugal forces of the Mallorca and Nadal's life and Spanish culture and Nadal's fantastic athletic ability. It was soccer. It was gonna be soccer.
Mhm.
He's, in the jerseys watching his uncle Miguel Angel play for the Spanish national team in Mallorca and Barcelona. And he was, by all accounts, truly gifted. I saw some interviews with his boyhood tennis coach and his boyhood soccer coach, Toni Nadal, and the soccer coach's name escapes me, but the soccer coach saying, Rafa's a very fortunate young man. He has two great gifts, two great talents. He's going to have to choose. That's the hard part. So I think
Good choice.
I think he would have been a Real Madrid striker. I really believe that. So Toni changed the arc of history and kind of moved into tennis. So that connection is unique in that regard as well.
Yeah, good choice, I would say, in hindsight. Also, and then we can kind of move on from this, but you've covered other sports. You've been to a bunch of Olympics. I can't think of a record more unbreakable than this. Maybe there's a sport I'm not thinking of, Chris, but 14 Roland Garroses. I don't think there's a more unbreakable record in sports.
I mean, you look at Michael Phelps's medal counts, or you look at most recently it's Michaela Schifrin in World Cup skiing, breaking Stenmark's record and number of World Cup wins. I mean, if you delve into all these different Olympic sports, Karelin, the Greco-Roman wrestler from Russia, multiple. There's a lot of outliers out there, but I think in this incredibly high-profile event like the French Open, an annual event with the competition he was up against, and being able to have that kind of serial success, to me, it's the most extraordinary one. But I'm a tennis guy, so I can connect even more. But I think what's great about it is that Feliciano Lopez, you read the beginning of the book. Yeah. It's a great comment from Feliciano. He goes, "You don't even dream of winning 14 French Opens. You don't even think of it. You dream of winning one or maybe a few, but you don't dream of winning. You don't dream of winning 14. It's just not something that's even on the radar." Borg won 6. Yeah. Navratilova won 9 Wimbledons, and she was considered just crazy overachiever on the grass. 14 is a crazy number. It is.
A few more things here with Chris Clarey on the Inside In Tennis podcast, talking about his book, The Warrior, Rafael Nadal and His Kingdom of Clay, out May 13th in the United States and other countries. We get ready for a Roland Garros without Rafa for the first time, permanently without Rafa for the first time going forward in this new reality. Also, shout out to the French Tennis Federation for proving once and for all last year, for those that needed it, that the draw is random. We had to get that in there as well. So with the Nadal, Zverev first round matchup, but it's going to be odd. It's going to be like that first couple newlywed experience, Chris, where the first couple Roland Garros just aren't going to feel right without Rafa in there. And then what we're saying now in the current landscape is it is more wide open just by nature of no Nadal to dominate the field.
Yeah, it's true. He didn't play in 23, and we weren't sure what he was going to do, but it certainly was no sense it was 100% over. So this will be the first time, a new era, and it's interesting. No one's really grabbed the torch. They could have. There was opening. Sinner was out 3 months, and Zverev has the clay court bona fides. Alcaraz is an incredibly gifted clay court player, but nobody's grabbed it. So it is, I think, up for grabs in a really fascinating way. I'm not a big lover of parity in tennis. I don't want that. I want to have some. I like surprises, but not parity. So, but I think we have enough established figures to make this a really fascinating one. And you got Zverev, who has underperformed, but he certainly has capacity to lift. Alcaraz, I think, on all things being equal, if they're all playing their best, I think he wins. Sinner is going to be fresh, and in some ways, so much to prove, and his Clay's not his best, but he's awfully good at it. And he pushed Rafa pretty hard on it before, back in the day. Mm-hmm. And then you got Casper Ruud, who's probably the most deserving of them all.
Yeah,
you could argue Zverev, but Ruud obviously has paid his dues. Had to play Djokovic and Nadal in the finals that he played at the French Open, and he just wins Madrid, looking pretty good, and seems to have had a breakthrough. And you got guys like Musetti and Draper and Rune who've sort of shown their good form. So it's a fascinating one. I don't see somebody way off the radar coming in and doing it. Could happen more on the women's side, possibly. I'm not sure what we consider off the radar, but you can see someone like a Diana Schneider coming in and having a great run, or somebody, she's already on the cusp of the top 10. Yeah. But hasn't had a big win yet in a major or anything. Andreeva, certainly possibility. Iga seems like she's vulnerable. If I had to pick, I'd go with Sabalenka. I don't know about you, but I think that's who I'd go with.
I didn't hear Novak Djokovic's name on the men's list. And is there a correction there? Or is that what we're going with? He's not
I
on
may
the
regret
contender
that.
list.
I may
Okay.
regret that. But no, I don't see it. I don't see it at this point. Best of five. And I never should write off greatness, and there's no doubt that's what he is. But
Okay.
just don't see it here. I could maybe see it at Wimbledon. He gets his
Hmm.
game back together, kind of like he did last year, where he
Yeah.
managed to peak for the Olympics and what he was really focused on.
Hmm.
French is with all the contenders and all the grind of best of five. That'd be tough.
Opportunity for a player like Casper Ruud to maybe elevate and take advantage of what the landscape is. And yeah, on the women's side, you highlighted it, right? If Iga's not four-time champion, we're still saying that in her career insights, well, is Chrissy Everett's record of most women's Roland Garros titles, but the least amount of momentum and the least great positive form, positive vibes, whatever you want to call it, going into a Roland Garros. So maybe there is an opportunity for players a little further down, not totally further down. Obviously, Coco Gauff is still a top three player, is knocking on the door at number two. But if it's Gauff, if it's Sabalenka, if Sabalenka gets the clay court title here, Chris, I mean, another elevation for really a dominant number one when you look at the point total right now.
Yeah, it's big. Yeah, big gap, big delta, and she deserves it. It's been great,
Mhm.
except for that little hiccup in the Middle East after Australian Open. It's been a very powerful season, but I don't think she's in any way feeling fully satisfied because there's been some big frustrations. The
Yeah.
defeats in Australia, defeat in Indian Wells, to Andreeva. So she's got some things she wants to prove to herself and to the wider game. But it's close. But I would make her even on her weakest surface, arguably. I think she hasn't done that much on grass yet, but I think she can win Wimbledon
Mhm.
multiple times.
Mhm.
I think she's got a shot.
So we look at Roland Garros 2025. The other news is that there will be a Rafael Nadal tribute. He has the statue. They're going to honor him the first day of action there. And I want to know what your thoughts are of what the tribute might look like. Also, will it be one of those tributes that maybe takes away from some of the negative vibes that his team members had for the Davis Cup, trying to do the same thing?
It better be grandiose because I think that was the criticism. There was
Yeah,
that was probably Rafa's doing the Davis Cup.
honestly,
He,
yeah.
he chose to be there. I mean, obviously it's a team event. If you end up losing in the dead of night in southern Spain to the Netherlands in the opening round, which was always a possibility because those guys were good, you're going to probably be in anticlimax mode, and that's what
Mhm.
happened. And you don't want to. The Netherlands just won. You don't want to make it this incredible Rafa spectacle with all that in the middle of a team event. So it was probably a context issue, I think. But I think with all this time to plan, the
Yeah.
French obviously approached Rafa. I know Rafa had a chance to go do similar things in Monte Carlo and Barcelona this year and decided not to, decided to make the priority Roland Garros because that's kind of the signature achievement for him. I'm sure it'll be big lights, big videos, all the right people. It's going to be, it'll be big. I mean, riding off the Olympics, hopefully it'll be better weather than the Olympic torch moment.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it. It just made me think of the funniest tribute of all time was the tribute that wasn't a tribute because he kept playing, but the Andy Murray Australia one was
Yeah.
really funny. And then he's like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I'm actually still going to be playing."
I'm guilty. I wrote the farewell column that time too. Yeah, I did it too early.
Hey, nobody bats 1,000, so that's another lesson for you.
Between the Nadal one-handed backhand and the Murray farewell, I have not a forget.
Well, Chris, this has always been a blast, and I can't recommend this book enough for Rafael Nadal and his Kingdom of Clay. What's your schedule like going forward? We know Roland Garros is coming up, but events you're going to be at, and then where we'll see you promoting, and where we can see and pick up this book.
Yeah, I'm going to be at Roland Garros for the duration, writing for Tennis and Beyond, which is my newsletter on Substack, and I'm going to try to do quite a lot of connections with the book on that as well, with Nadal content that I have. I'll be at Wimbledon as well, and hopefully I'll be at the U.S. Open. Don't know for sure how much I'll be there yet, but I'll be for sure full ride at Roland Garros and Wimbledon, and I want to just keep telling stories and tapping into my knowledge of the game and history. And I'm not going to cover the news like I used to for the New York Times for 30 plus years and middle of the night react to the latest story, but I want to use my perspective and my strengths and definitely want to write some more books when I've recovered from this one
Yeah.
and keep going. But no, I'm a fortunate man, Mitch. I feel very lucky to have been able to have had the career and daily journalism that I had, and I've had just thanks to readers and people like yourself, been able to make the transition to writing books, and it's been really gratifying.
Well, we appreciate you in the game. Tennis is lucky to have you, Chris Clarey. Last question. When could we expect the Novak Djokovic book?
Yeah, that's I keep hearing it. All I know is, sure, I'm thinking about it. You can't not.
Yeah.
Yes, I got a title in mind. I'm not talking about the title yet, but I'll tell you when I know for sure. But I want it to be a book that it needs the right format.
Right.
I didn't want to write the same book for Nadal that I wrote on Federer. And if I do the Djokovic book, I want it to be distinct from the other two. It's not a series in the same format. I need to find the right way in. And right now, it just sounds like a very daunting thing. It sounds as daunting as 14 French Opens to me. Try to sit down and write another book right away. So I'll take a little bit of a break.
Well, take some much-deserved time. If anybody can accomplish this task, it is yourself. Remember the Warrior, Rafael Nadal, and his Kingdom of Clay, written by our guest on the show this week, Chris Clarey. A must-read for all tennis fans. I could speak to that. May 13th in the United States. Chris, always a blast. Thanks for coming on the Inside In Tennis podcast. Can't wait to do it again.
Hey, Mitch. Good fun. Always good to see you.
That was Chris Clarey. This was the Inside In Tennis podcast. We're on the Believe Network, and you can find this show on all your podcast platforms, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, or somewhere else. Just download the show so you can automatically subscribe to it. Click that subscribe button, get those episodes automatically downloaded, leave a nice rating or a review, and check out the YouTube channel at Mitch Michals for full video episodes of this and all the episodes in the catalog of the Inside In Tennis podcast. For Chris Clarey, I'm Mitch Michals. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you soon.